The candles burned low. The castle doors were sealed. Outside, the celebration roared with drunken laughter. But inside the bridal chamber, a young noblewoman waited in silence. Because tonight, her body might not belong to her husband. And everyone in the castle knew it. The bells had rung since dawn. From the highest towers of the castle to the muddy streets below, the marriage was celebrated as a triumph. A union of land. A union of power. A union that would shape the fate of families for generations. The bride wore silk threaded with gold. Her hair was braided with pearls. Servants bowed as she passed. But beneath the veil her hands trembled. Because in the medieval world, a wedding was not simply a celebration. It was a transaction. And the first night was the most dangerous part of the bargain. Torches flickered along the castle walls as the feast stretched into darkness. Roasted boar. Spilled wine. Minstrels singing of love and honor. Yet whispers moved among the guests like cold wind. Not about love, but about a custom. A shadowed privilege whispered across Europe. A right that could turn the wedding night into something far darker. Some called it the first night. Others spoke the words only in hushed tones. The Lord's right. In the medieval order of power, the Lord owned everything. The forests. The rivers. The villages. And in many places, people believed he also possessed a terrifying privilege over those who lived under his authority. A right to claim the bride before her husband did. The Latin scribes called it jus primi noctis. The right of the first night. Whether it was law or threat or brutal tradition disguised as custom depended on the Lord. And on the helplessness of those beneath him. For noblewomen, the terror came from a different place. Because while peasants feared the Lord's appetite, noble brides feared the politics of their own marriages. A wedding night was not intimacy. It was proof. Proof that alliances were sealed. Proof that bloodlines would continue. Proof that the bride was untouched. And if that proof failed, the consequences could destroy kingdoms. But in the year 1477, inside the cold stone halls of Burgundy, one wedding night would ignite a scandal so dangerous that men would vanish. Servants would be tortured. And a young bride would discover that marriage could be more terrifying than war. Her name was Mary of Burgundy, daughter of the powerful Duke Charles the Bold, an heiress whose land stretched across Europe. After her father died on the battlefield, she became the most valuable bride on the continent. Kings wanted her. Princes plotted for her. Empires could be gained through her. Finally, the choice was made. She would marry Maximilian of Austria, a rising Habsburg prince. The wedding was celebrated with enormous grandeur. Flags filled the streets. Church bells thundered. Nobles from across Europe gathered in velvet and armor. But beneath the spectacle, fear moved quietly through the palace. Because Mary's marriage was not simply romance. It was survival. Her lands were under threat. Enemies circled like wolves. If her marriage failed, her entire realm could collapse. Which meant the wedding night had to prove one thing. The marriage was real. In medieval courts, privacy did not exist for rulers. Not even in the bedroom. On the night of their marriage, Mary and Maximilian were escorted to the chamber by nobles holding candles. The bed was enormous. Covered in embroidered cloth. Heavy velvet curtains hung around it like dark walls. But the room was not empty. Witnesses remained. Ladies in waiting. Court officials. Even bishops. They watched as the couple entered the bed. This ritual was called the bedding ceremony. Its purpose was simple. To confirm the union. To prevent doubt. To ensure that politics had truly become flesh. But for many noble brides this moment was unbearable. Because every movement, Every whisper, every hesitation, was being observed. Yet the worst fear was not humiliation. It was what could happen if the marriage was not consummated. Because history held terrifying examples of brides whose wedding nights ended not with love, but with accusation. And once a noblewoman's honor was questioned, mercy rarely followed. Across medieval Europe, powerful marriages sometimes collapsed within hours. If a groom claimed the bride was not pure, or if witnesses doubted what happened in the bed, the bride's fate could become catastrophic. Annulments destroyed reputations. Families lost alliances. Wars could begin. One infamous case occurred in 1385, when a noble marriage in France collapsed after the groom declared his bride incapable of consummation. Doctors were summoned. Midwives were forced to examine her body. Witnesses argued before royal courts. For months the woman lived in humiliation while strangers debated the most private details of her life. In the end, her marriage was declared invalid, and she vanished quietly from history. But other brides were not so fortunate. In some courts, wedding nights became acts of political domination. Powerful husbands treated their brides as trophies of conquest. Records from medieval chronicles describe brides who fainted from terror. Some prayed through the night. Others begged attendants not to leave them alone. In extreme cases, chroniclers describe violence so brutal that brides were injured or even killed. Because medieval marriage was not always about companionship. It was about control. A noblewoman's body carried the future of dynasties. And if a husband suspected betrayal, or infertility, or disobedience, punishment could be swift, even lethal. But the darkest truth was this: sometimes the greatest threat to a noble bride was not her husband. It was her own family. Because if the marriage failed, they might decide she was more valuable dead than dishonored. In one chilling account from a 15th century Italian court, a young noble bride entered her wedding chamber surrounded by candlelight and music. Yet witnesses later recorded that she knelt beside the bed before the ceremony began. Not in joy. In prayer. She whispered to the Virgin Mary for protection. Not from war. Not from plague. But from the man she had just married. Because she knew something no one else in the castle did. Her husband was infamous for cruelty. 2 previous wives had died mysteriously. The marriage proceeded anyway. Because alliances mattered more than fear. That night, the doors closed. Servants waited outside. Torches burned down to ash. And by morning, the bride had not survived the night. Her death was recorded simply as illness. No investigation followed. The alliance remained intact. Stories like this echo through the shadows of medieval chronicles. Many were hidden behind polite language. Tragic accident. Sudden sickness. God's will. But historians reading between the lines see another truth. Marriage in the medieval aristocracy was often a battlefield. A battlefield fought not with swords, but with bloodlines. Young women entered these unions carrying enormous expectations. Produce heirs. Secure alliances. Remain obedient. And survive the night. For some, they did. For others, the wedding chamber became the last place they were ever seen alive. The torches eventually burned out. The castle fell silent. The feast was forgotten. But in the cold stone corridors of medieval history, one truth still whispers through the darkness. For many noble women, the most terrifying moment of their lives was not war, not plague, not execution. It was the moment the wedding doors closed, and the world left them alone with the man who now owned their fate.